How does a quiet stepfather, humiliated by his wife and stepdaughter on Christmas, turn a cruel public ambush into the last meal they'll ever share at his expense? When my stepdaughter handed me the bill for a lavish dinner I wasn't even allowed to enjoy, I smiled, handed her a set of keys, and said the one thing that made them lose their minds. Here's how years of patience ended in a single, devastating moment of lawful revenge. The Halperin family kitchen had always been my sanctuary, but by December 23rd, it felt more like a stage where I performed the role of the invisible man. I stood at the granite countertop, methodically wrapping Christmas gifts, while my wife Jeanette scrolled through her phone at the breakfast bar, occasionally snorting with laughter at whatever message had captured her attention. Greg, did you remember to pick up the wine for tomorrow? She asked without looking up, her manicured fingers never pausing their frantic typing. Got it yesterday, I replied, adding ribbon to a carefully wrapped jewelry box containing the pearl earrings she'd mentioned wanting back in October. The Bordeaux you liked from our anniversary dinner, she grunted acknowledgement, still absorbed in her screen. At 48, Jeanette Caraway Halperin maintained the polished appearance of someone who worked in corporate HR, always put together, always networking, always managing impressions. What she wasn't managing, apparently, was basic courtesy toward the man who'd been paying her daughter's bills for 5 years. The front door slammed with theatrical force, announcing the arrival of my 23-year-old stepdaughter, Alyssa Caraway. Her heels clicked across the hardwood with the aggressive staccato of someone perpetually annoyed by the world's failure to revolve around her schedule. Traffic was absolutely insane, she declared, dropping her designer purse on the counter inches from my carefully arranged gifts. I swear, people in this city have no idea how to drive. Hey, sweetheart, Jeanette finally looked up, beaming at her daughter with the kind of warmth she'd forgotten to show me months ago. How was the spa? Divine. Though I'll need another session next week. This holiday stress is killing my skin. Alyssa glanced at my gift wrapping operation with barely concealed disdain. Still using newspaper comics, Greg? How quaint. I'd actually upgraded to proper wrapping paper years ago, but correcting her would only invite more mockery. Just trying to add some personality, I said mildly. She snorted, the same dismissive sound her mother had perfected. Well, make sure my gift doesn't look like it came from a garage sale. The gift in question, a professional photography equipment set she'd mentioned wanting for her influencer career, had cost me nearly $800. But pointing that out would violate the unspoken family rule. Greg provides, Greg doesn't comment. Speaking of tomorrow, Alyssa pulled out her phone. I made reservations at Linden and Pine for Christmas dinner. 7 p.m. sharp. I paused in my wrapping. I thought we were doing Christmas dinner here. I already bought the ham and plans change. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. This is much more sophisticated. The kind of place that understands presentation. Jeanette nodded approvingly. That sounds wonderful, honey. Very classy. It'll be perfect for photos, Alyssa continued, now typing rapidly on her phone. I'm sending you both the details now. Don't be late. They don't hold tables, even for paying customers. The emphasis on paying customers wasn't lost on me. In Alyssa speak, that meant I'd be covering the bill while she curated the perfect social media moment. My phone buzzed with her text. Christmas dinner tomorrow. Linden and Pine, 7 p.m. Dress code upscale casual. Don't embarrass us. Looks great, I replied, though something about the timing felt off. Most upscale restaurants took Christmas reservations weeks in advance, not the day before. The next morning at the warehouse where I worked as a logistics manager, I found myself venting to my friend Leonard Leo Prater during our coffee break. Leo, a straight-talking guy in his mid-50s who'd been divorced twice, had a talent for cutting through emotional fog with brutal honesty. Let me get this straight, Leo said, stirring sugar into his coffee with more force than necessary. Your stepdaughter, who doesn't even live with you anymore, decided to change Christmas dinner plans at the last minute, picked an expensive restaurant, and expects you to foot the bill? It's not that simple. The hell it isn't. Leo's weathered face scrunched into a frown. Greg, you're a good guy, but good guys finish last when they let people walk all over them. How much money have you spent on that girl over the years? I'd never actually calculated it, but the number would probably make me sick. College expenses, apartment deposits, car repairs, credit card bailouts, medical bills. Alyssa had a talent for turning every minor crisis into a major financial emergency that somehow became my responsibility. She's family, I said weakly. Family doesn't treat you like a walking ATM. When's the last time she said thank you? Hell, when's the last time she said anything to you that wasn't a demand or an insult? I couldn't answer that question, which was answer enough. That evening, I returned home to find Jeanette huddled over her laptop in her home office, typing with the focused intensity of someone crafting important correspondence. The screen angled away from the door, but I caught glimpses of what looked like email exchanges with Alyssa. Working late? I asked from the doorway. She startled, quickly minimizing the window. Just coordinating tomorrow's dinner. You know how these fancy places can be about details. Need any help? No, no. Alyssa and I have it handled. You just need to show up and, well, pay for it. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Later, while Jeanette showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The preview showed a text from Alyssa. Mom, did you confirm the 5 p.m. time? We need to make sure we're done eating before... The message cut off there, but I'd seen enough. 5 p.m.? I thought dinner was at 7. I told myself it was probably just a typo, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. When you've spent 5 years being treated as an afterthought, you develop a sixth sense for when something's not right. The feeling intensified when I overheard Jeanette on a phone call the next morning, speaking in hushed tones while she thought I was in the garage. Making sure he pays for something this year, she was saying, followed by laughter. Oh, she's got it all planned out. It'll be perfect. Perfect for whom, I wondered. By afternoon, the pieces were falling into place in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. Alyssa had texted me twice more about the dinner, each message emphasizing punctuality and proper dress, but something felt performative about her enthusiasm, like an actress overplaying her role. When I suggested we all drive together, Jeanette claimed she needed to run errands first and would meet us there. When I offered to pick up Alyssa, she said she was coming straight from a friend's house. Everyone had a reason to arrive separately, which struck me as odd for a family dinner. But I pushed down the doubts and focused on getting ready. I put on my best suit, the navy one Jeanette had complimented when we'd gone to her company's awards dinner. I wanted to look the part of the successful stepfather, even if I was starting to feel like an unwitting actor in someone else's play. The restaurant's address led me to an upscale part of downtown, where linden and pine occupied the ground floor of a converted historic building. Through the large windows, I could see warmly lit tables filled with well-dressed diners, enjoying what looked like an intimate, expensive Christmas experience. I arrived at exactly 7 p.m., as instructed. The hostess, a polished woman in her 30s, who introduced herself as Pauline Grant, greeted me with professional warmth. You must be Gregory Halperin, she said, consulting her tablet. Your party is already seated. Right this way. Already seated? That was odd. I thought I was punctual. She led me through the dining room to a large table near the back, where I found Jeanette, Alyssa, and Jeanette's sister, Deborah Deb Stanwyck, already gathered. The scene that greeted me made my stomach drop. Empty plates, crumpled napkins, wine glasses drained to the dregs. They'd clearly finished eating. Greg? Alyssa called out with theatrical enthusiasm, loud enough to draw glances from nearby tables. You made it! Jeanette was smiling, but it was the kind of smile a cat gives a cornered mouse. Deb looked like she was trying not to laugh. Sorry I'm late, I said, though I wasn't late at all. Traffic was... Oh, don't worry about it, Alyssa waved dismissively. We went ahead and ordered since we were so hungry, but look, she gestured grandly to an empty chair. We saved you a seat. The chair sat at the head of the table, positioned like a throne, or a defendant's chair. That's thoughtful, I managed, taking the seat while trying to process what was happening. We had the most amazing meal, Deb chimed in, dabbing at her lips with her napkin. The lobster was divine. And the wine selection. Alyssa really knows how to pick a restaurant. Speaking of which, Alyssa reached for a leather folder that had been sitting beside her plate. We do have one tiny little problem. She slid the folder across the table to me with a smile, that didn't reach her eyes. Inside was a bill that made my breath catch. $437 for a meal I hadn't eaten at a dinner I'd apparently missed, despite arriving exactly on time. "Oh, I texted the wrong time," Alyssa said with exaggerated innocence, her voice carrying clearly to the surrounding tables. "You can still join us by paying for it." The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us, or maybe that was just the sound of my world shifting on its axis. Other diners were definitely watching now, sensing drama unfolding. Jeanette laughed. Actually laughed. "Classic Alyssa," she said fondly, as if her daughter's mistake was charming rather than calculated. I stared at the bill, at the faces around the table, at the empty plates that represented a meal I'd been deliberately excluded from, but was expected to finance. 5 years of accumulated disrespect crystallized into this single, perfect moment of humiliation. But instead of the anger or embarrassment they were clearly expecting, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. Cold, sharp clarity about exactly who these people were and what I meant to them. I looked up at Alyssa, at her expectant smirk, at Jeanette's barely contained glee, at Deb's obvious anticipation of my reaction. And I smiled. The smile seemed to confuse them, which gave me a moment to think while the restaurant hummed with conversation around us. But my mind wasn't on the present moment. It was traveling back through 5 years of memories I'd been too generous to properly examine. It started the day Alyssa graduated from college. She'd been living in a cramped apartment near campus, surviving on ramen and student loans, when she called me in tears about her post-graduation housing situation. "Greg, I don't know what to do," she'd sobbed over the phone. "My lease is up, and I can't afford a first month, last month, and security deposit on a new place. I'll be homeless." Jeanette had been standing right there, nodding encouragingly as I listened to her daughter's crisis. "We have to help her," she'd whispered. "She's family." So I'd driven 3 hours to her college town, rented a moving truck, and spent my weekend loading her belongings while she directed operations from the sidewalk, too busy coordinating her post-grad celebration on social media to lift anything heavier than her phone. The new apartment I'd co-signed for was in a trendy part of the city, with granite countertops and a view of the river. The deposit alone had been $1,500, plus first and last month's rent. When I'd handed over the certified check, Alyssa had barely looked up from her phone. "Thanks, Greg. Oh, and I'll need help with utilities setup too. I'm terrible with that boring stuff." Terrible with boring stuff became her standard excuse for avoiding any adult responsibility. Over the following months, I'd fielded calls from utility companies, insurance agents, and landlords, always with the same message. Alyssa Caraway had listed Gregory Halperin as her emergency contact and financial guarantor. The car situation had been particularly galling. She'd bought a used BMW with money from her graduation gifts, but within 6 months it needed major repairs. The transmission, she'd explained tearfully, had just died while she was driving to a job interview. "I can't get to work without a car," she'd pleaded, "and I can't pay for the repairs without work. It's like a horrible cycle." The repairs had cost $2,800. I'd paid it, telling myself it was an investment in her independence. She'd picked up the car without inviting me along, and I'd learned about the successful repair only through a social media post, showing her posing next to the BMW with the caption, "Back on the road, hashtag blessed, hashtag new transmission, hashtag living my best life." No mention of who'd made that blessing possible. The pattern had continued for years. Medical bills when she'd decided she needed cosmetic dental work, credit card bailouts when her influencer career required expensive equipment and wardrobe updates, rent assistance when she'd decided her apartment wasn't photogenic enough, and moved to a pricier place with better lighting. Each crisis had been presented as temporary, each payment positioned as a loan she'd definitely pay back once her social media career took off. But somehow her follower count never translated into actual income, and my loans never got repaid. The breaking point should have been last spring, when I discovered she'd been using my credit card for her expenses. Not stealing it, I'd given her access for emergencies only. But her definition of emergency had expanded to include restaurant meals, shopping sprees, and spa treatments. When I gently confronted her about the unauthorized charges, she turned it around on me. "I can't believe you're being so petty about money," she'd said, managing to sound both hurt and indignant. "I thought you cared about me. I thought we were family." Jeanette had backed her up naturally. "She's just trying to establish herself, Greg. Young people need support while they figure things out." So I'd paid the credit card bill, nearly $4,000, and told myself it was the last time. But there had been a next time, and another after that. The worst part wasn't the money, though. It was the complete lack of gratitude, the casual assumption that my wallet was their emergency fund, and the way they'd both started treating my generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift. Last month, I'd overheard Alyssa on the phone with a friend, laughing about her sugar stepdad who totally doesn't get that I'm never paying him back. When I'd tried to address it with Jeanette, she'd accused me of eavesdropping and making Alyssa feel unwelcome in our home. Our home. The home I'd been paying the mortgage on for 8 years. Sitting in that restaurant, staring at a bill for a meal I hadn't eaten, I finally understood what Leo had been trying to tell me. This wasn't about family loyalty or supporting a young person's dreams. This was about two people who'd discovered they could manipulate my decency for their benefit, and who'd grown bold enough to humiliate me publicly for their entertainment. The memory that crystallized it all was from just 2 weeks ago. I'd been at the pharmacy waiting for a prescription when I'd spotted Jeanette and Alyssa at the coffee shop next door. They'd been hunched over Jeanette's phone, scrolling through what looked like restaurant websites. I'd been about to go say hello when I'd heard Alyssa's voice carry through the thin walls. "Christmas is on the old man this year, as usual. But this time, let's make it interesting." They'd both laughed, and I'd felt something cold settle in my chest. Now, looking at their expectant faces across the restaurant table, I realized they'd been planning this humiliation for weeks. The wrong time, the finished meal, the public setting, it was all calculated to maximize my embarrassment and their entertainment. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed I'd keep playing the role of the generous fool indefinitely. "Well," Alyssa prompted, tapping her manicured nails on the table, "are you going to pay, or are we going to have a problem?" Other diners were definitely watching now, sensing the tension at our table. I could feel their curious stares, could imagine them wondering what kind of family drama was unfolding in their elegant Christmas dining experience. I picked up the bill, studied it carefully, and set it back down. Then, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small manila envelope I'd prepared that morning, acting on an instinct I hadn't fully understood until this moment. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and clear enough to carry to the neighboring tables, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about who's paying for what around here." The envelope sat on the white tablecloth between us like a small bomb, and I could see the confusion flickering across their faces. This wasn't part of their script. In their version of events, I was supposed to be flustered, embarrassed, maybe even angry, but ultimately compliant. The envelope represented something they hadn't planned for: preparation. "What's that supposed to mean?" Alyssa asked, her voice losing some of its theatrical confidence. Before I could answer, my mind flashed back to 3 days earlier, when I'd been standing in that same pharmacy waiting area, my prescription forgotten as I'd listened to my wife and stepdaughter plan my public humiliation. I'd initially planned to confront them directly, but Leo's advice had echoed in my head: stop playing Santa and start playing chess. So instead of confronting them, I'd started documenting. The first stop had been my home office, where I'd spent that evening going through 5 years of financial records, every payment, every bailout, every emergency loan that had never been repaid. The total had been staggering, over $43,000, not counting the ongoing costs of insurance, phone bills, and other expenses I'd absorbed without thinking. But the real revelation had come when I'd started looking into Alyssa's current living situation. She'd moved out of my house 6 months ago, claiming she needed independence and space to grow as a person. What she'd actually needed was freedom to live however she wanted without my boring presence cramping her style. The problem was she'd left most of her belongings behind, treating my house like a free storage unit while she lived in her trendy apartment. Clothes, furniture, electronics, books, artwork. Half of her life was still cluttering up what used to be my guest room. I'd asked her several times when she planned to collect her things. Each time, she'd had an excuse. Too busy with work, didn't have a truck, would get to it eventually. The guest room had become a shrine to her delayed adolescence, and I'd been too polite to force the issue. But politeness, I'd realized, was a luxury I could no longer afford. The morning after overhearing their restaurant planning session, I'd called Sheila Watkins, who owned a storage facility on the other side of town. Sheila was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, who'd built her business by understanding that people's belongings often became weapons in family disputes. I need to store some items, I'd told her. Furniture, clothes, personal effects. Probably need the space for about a year. How much stuff are we talking about? I'd estimated based on the chaos in my guest room. Maybe a 10 by 10 unit? I can do that. You moving out, or is someone moving out on you? Sheila's directness had been refreshing after years of navigating Alyssa and Jeanette's passive-aggressive communication style. Someone needs to finish moving out. I'm just helping the process along. One of those situations. You'll want our premium service then. We handle the packing and transport. You get receipts for everything. And the person whose stuff it is gets exactly one set of keys. Clean break, no arguments about who took what. That sounds perfect. Fair warning, though. Once we move the stuff and you pay for the unit, it's legally theirs to deal with. You won't be able to access it, won't be responsible for it, and won't be getting any money back if they decide not to claim it. I understand. And I had understood. What I was buying wasn't just storage space. It was freedom. Freedom from being Alyssa's unpaid landlord, freedom from her treating my home like her personal warehouse, and freedom from the constant reminder of how thoroughly I'd been taken advantage of. The move had happened 2 days ago, while Alyssa was at work and Jeanette was at her office Christmas party. 3 professional movers had efficiently packed and transported every item that belonged to my stepdaughter, leaving the guest room empty for the first time in years. I'd paid for a full year of storage in advance, another $800, and received a receipt along with the only set of keys to Unit 247. The movers had been thorough, photographing everything for insurance purposes and providing me with a complete inventory. That evening, when Jeanette had noticed the empty room, I'd simply said that Alyssa had finally collected her belongings. Since Jeanette had been pressuring me for months to give Alyssa space to be independent, she'd seemed pleased by this development. Neither of them had realized that independence was exactly what they were about to get. Now, sitting in this expensive restaurant with their expectant faces staring at me, I felt the weight of those keys in the envelope. But there was more than just keys in there. I'd also printed out bank statements showing every payment I'd made on Alyssa's behalf, along with a letter I'd drafted explaining that my financial support was ending effective immediately. Greg? Jeanette's voice had an edge of concern now. What's in the envelope? I looked around the restaurant, taking in the curious faces at nearby tables, the elegant holiday decorations, the soft lighting that was supposed to create a romantic ambiance. Instead, it felt like a courtroom where I was finally ready to present my evidence. I've been thinking about Christmas gifts, I said conversationally, and I realized I've been giving the wrong kind of presents for years. Alyssa rolled her eyes. Oh God, are you going to get all sentimental? Can we just pay the bill and go? I have plans later. Plans that I'm financing, I assume? The question hung in the air like smoke. Deb shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally sensing that this wasn't going according to whatever script she'd been expecting. What's that supposed to mean? Jeanette asked. It means I've spent the last few days doing some math. Some very interesting math about where my money goes and what I get in return. I tapped the envelope gently. The results were educational. Leo had warned me about this moment. When you finally stand up to bullies, he'd said, they don't just back down gracefully, they escalate. They'll try to make you feel guilty or crazy or like you're the one being unreasonable. Don't let them flip the script. I could see the script flipping beginning already. Alyssa's face was shifting from confusion to indignation, preparing to paint me as the villain in whatever story she was about to tell. I don't like your tone, she said, her voice rising just enough to carry to the surrounding tables. We're family. We're supposed to support each other. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Family members should support each other. They should also respect each other, appreciate each other, and treat each other with basic courtesy. What are you saying? Jeanette's question came out sharper than she'd probably intended. I'm saying that support flows both ways in healthy families. And I'm saying that respect isn't optional just because someone pays the bills. The restaurant had gone quiet around us now, other diners abandoning any pretense of not listening. We'd become the evening's entertainment, which was exactly what Alyssa had wanted, just not in the way she'd planned. Are you seriously going to make a scene over money? Alyssa hissed. In public. The irony was breathtaking. She'd orchestrated this entire evening to make a scene over money in public, but somehow my response was inappropriate. I'm not making a scene, I said calmly. I'm having a conversation about expectations and consequences, something we probably should have had years ago. I picked up the envelope and held it, feeling the weight of the keys inside. 5 years of accumulated frustration, disrespect, and financial manipulation had led to this moment. But instead of feeling angry, I felt oddly peaceful. The thing about consequences, I continued, is that they're most effective when they're unexpected. The envelope remained unopened on the table, but its presence had fundamentally shifted the dynamic of our conversation. I could see Alyssa and Jeanette exchanging glances, trying to communicate silently about how to regain control of a situation that was clearly spiraling away from their carefully laid plans. But my mind was still processing the methodical preparation that had led to this moment. 2 days ago, I'd stood in the empty guest room, surveying the space that had been cluttered with Alyssa's belongings for months. The professional movers had been incredibly thorough. Every piece of clothing, every book, every decorative item had been cataloged and transported to the storage facility. Sheila Watkins had been waiting for me when I'd arrived to inspect the unit. She'd walked me through the process with the efficiency of someone who'd handled dozens of similar situations. Everything's been packed in clearly labeled boxes, she'd explained, showing me the organized rows of containers filling the 10 by 10 space. Furniture's wrapped and positioned to prevent damage. Your stepdaughter's electronics are in the climate-controlled section. The inventory list had been 3 pages long. Clothes worth thousands of dollars. A laptop and tablet she'd claimed were essential for work. Artwork and decorations she'd insisted on keeping at my house because her apartment wasn't ready for them yet. Exercise equipment she'd never used but insisted she'd get back to eventually. Here's how this works, Sheila had continued, handing me a sealed envelope containing the only set of keys. You've paid for 1 year of storage. After that, if the rent isn't paid, we auction the contents according to state law. The person whose belongings these are gets all the rights and all the responsibilities. What if she claims she can't afford the storage fees? Sheila had given me a look that suggested she'd heard that story before. Then she needs to figure out what's worth keeping and what isn't. That's what being an adult means. Making choices about what you can and can't afford. The receipt for the storage fees had gone into my files, along with all the other documentation I'd been gathering. Bank statements showing the car repairs, rent assistance, credit card payments, and countless other emergencies I'd covered over the years. Insurance records listing Alyssa as a beneficiary on my life insurance policy, a designation I'd quietly changed the day before. The most revealing document had been my credit card statements. I'd given Alyssa access to one of my cards for emergencies only, but her definition of emergency had proven remarkably elastic. Spa treatments, restaurant meals, shopping sprees, even a weekend trip to the coast with friends, all charged to my account with the casual assumption that I'd pay without complaint. The previous week, I'd called the credit card company and requested a detailed breakdown of all charges made by authorized user Alyssa Caraway. The customer service representative had been helpful, even sympathetic, when I'd explained that I needed to review the account for family financial planning purposes. It looks like there have been quite a few charges, she'd said diplomatically. Would you like me to remove the authorized user from the account? Yes, please, effective immediately. I should mention that there are some pending charges that haven't cleared yet. A restaurant reservation system and what looks like a high-end retail purchase from yesterday. I'd authorized payment for the pending charges. No point in creating additional drama. But the card itself was now exclusively mine. Alyssa would discover this the next time she tried to use it, probably when she attempted to pay for whatever plans she had after tonight's dinner. The bank visit had been equally productive. I'd removed Alyssa as a beneficiary on all my accounts, updated my emergency contacts to list Leo instead of Jeanette, and requested copies of all transactions where I'd transferred money to Alyssa's account. The total had been sobering, over $15,000 in direct transfers, not counting the credit card payments and other indirect support. "Is there anything else we can help you with today, Mr. Halperin?" the bank manager had asked. "Actually, yes. I'd like to set up a separate account, something completely independent from my joint accounts with my wife." It had taken less than an hour to establish my financial independence, at least partially. The new account was in my name only, and I'd transferred enough money to cover my personal expenses for several months. If things went badly with Jeanette after tonight, which seemed increasingly likely, I wanted to be prepared. But the most important preparation had been psychological. I'd spent the morning of Christmas Eve sitting in my favorite coffee shop, the one where Leo and I often met to complain about work and family. I'd brought all my documentation, spreading it across a corner table like a general reviewing battle plans. The numbers told a clear story. Over 5 years, I'd provided more than $50,000 in direct and indirect financial support to a young woman who'd never once expressed genuine gratitude, who'd openly mocked my generosity, and who'd now orchestrated a public humiliation designed to extract even more money from me. But it wasn't really about the money, I'd realized. It was about respect, about basic human decency, about the assumption that kindness was weakness and generosity was stupidity. Leo had found me there, staring at the receipts and bank statements. "You look like a man who's finally done some math," he'd said, sliding into the opposite chair. "The math is illuminating. And I think it's time for some changes." Leo had nodded approvingly. "About damn time. What's the plan?" I'd shown him the storage unit keys, explained about the credit card and bank account changes, outlined my preparations for what I'd started thinking of as my financial independence day. "That's good groundwork," he'd said. "But what about tonight? You still planning to go to this restaurant ambush they've set up?" "Oh, I'm definitely going. And? And I'm going to give them exactly what they've been asking for all these years, which is independence. Complete, total, unambiguous independence." Now, sitting across from them in this expensive restaurant, I felt the weight of that decision. The envelope contained more than just keys. It contained